Welcome to the Coy-wolf Chronicles, where the survival of the fittest is just the beginning. And today we're diving into the heart of the wilderness to unpack Chapter 1. We've got the fire roaring and the story waiting. Let's see what happens next.
Welcome to The Debate. Imagine surviving the collapse of civilization.
Sounds like my average Tuesday, but go on.
Right, well, your ancestors spent 300 years underground in complete darkness. They're ravaged by sickness until you finally emerge. You find a plateau, you build this impenetrable fortress for your family, and you dam the river.
You think you've won?
Exactly, you think you've conquered starvation. But then, in the dead of night, you hear the wolves outside your walls coordinate a military retreat in perfect English. So the question is, are you losing your mind, or has nature just declared war?
And that is the exact nightmare scenario at the heart of Matthew de Gaelicki's novel Ember, the Coy-wolf Chronicles. We are looking at a deeply textured post-collapse world here.
Very deeply textured.
Yeah. On the plateau, you have the prosperous human settlement of Skyreach, led by engineers and pragmatic survivors. And then, down in the valley, you have a young, marginalized coy wolf named Ember. She's navigating this brutal, shifting animal hierarchy. And bridging these two worlds is the sudden, unprecedented escalation of violence from the valley's predators against the humans.
Which brings us to the central mystery of the text, and really the question we are tearing apart today. What is actually driving this conflict?
Right.
I argue that this is fundamentally a mechanical, biological consequence of human ecological disruption. So Skyreach's aggressive environmental manipulation, specifically their massive dam, has triggered a severe trophic cascade.
Okay, but
Wait, let me just state the thesis. What we are seeing isn't some magical awakening. It is a desperate, systemic response from an ecosystem pushed to the brink of collapse.
Evidence points to emergent animal sapience. Conscious warfare.
Conscious warfare?
Absolutely. These wolves aren't just hungry. They are executing organized, linguistic, military tactics that, frankly, completely transcend mere ecological desperation. I mean, they are fighting an ideological war against human expansion.
Okay. Let's ground this in the mechanics of what Skyreach actually did to this valley first. The author's notes are very clear on this. The conflict emerges from unintended consequences.
Sure.
When Alara, the settlement's leader, used those ancient library schematics to build that dam, she wasn't trying to destroy the forest. She was trying to save her people from starvation.
No one is saying she was a cartoon villain. Right, but let's look at the ecological mechanism of that choice. When you dam a river, you don't just secure water for your own measured crop trenches. You stop the seasonal flooding in the valley below.
Which starves the lower ecosystem.
Exactly. But the specific chain reaction is what matters here. Without the seasonal floods, the silt deposits stop, the underbrush dies. And without the underbrush, the massive deer herds that the great gray wolves rely on suffer a huge population crash.
Yeah, the baseline calories vanish.
We see this explicitly through Ember's perspective in Chapter 4. She notes the river has shrunk to a trickle and the prey has completely vanished. The humans have hoarded the biological lifeblood of the valley.
I agree with all of that. So when you completely strip the environment of its food, you force the apex predators into extreme, rapid behavioral adaptation just to survive. It's biology, not a military campaign.
Okay, I don't dispute the trophic cascade. The dam is real and the starvation is real. But if you're listening to this and thinking, well, a starving wolf pack attacks a human settlement, what's the big mystery? You really have to look at the nature of the retaliation.
Which was violent, as starving predators tend to be.
But it completely defies basic biological mechanics. Starving animals, driven by pure instinct and desperation, they follow the path of least resistance. They go for easy calories.
Well, they did take livestock on the outskirts of the settlement leading up to the main attack.
Skirmishes, probing attacks.
Oh, probing attacks now.
Yes, look at the coordinated raid in the village square. During that massive breach, the wolves bypassed the bawling cattle in the pens. They ignored the chickens. They ignored the goats.
I mean, it was chaotic.
Instead, they specifically fanned out and targeted the armed humans holding spears and clubs. A desperate, starving predator does not ignore a trapped goat to engage in melee combat with an armed human.
Okay, but
That is a calculated military feint designed to test the perimeter defenses of Skyreach.
you're calling it a military feint, but I really think we can explain this without jumping to human-level sapiens. Think of a biological immune system.
An immune system?
Yeah, hear me out. When a pathogen enters your body, your white blood cells execute a highly complex, coordinated attack to isolate and destroy it, right? They swarm, they cut off avenues of escape, they adapt to the pathogen's defenses. But a white blood cell isn't a conscious general writing a battle plan. It's a biological mechanism reacting to a stressor.
White blood cells don't speak English.
Let me finish the thought. The humans of Skyreach are the pathogen. They built a fortress of sawmill planks and masonry. To survive this new, highly lethal threat in their environment, the wolves' pack hunting strategy had to evolve.
So they evolved from biting deer to running a phalanx?
Splitting the line and neutralizing the armed guards before taking the prey isn't necessarily conscious warfare. I'd argue it is a highly evolved, distributed network response to the humans' improved fortifications.
But your immune system analogy completely breaks down when we look at how the attack ended. White blood cells don't issue vocal commands to lay down covering fire.
Neither do wolves.
They did in Chapter 6. During the attack, Auric, the grieving brewer living in the ruined tower, he is pinned by a wolf, and he clearly hears the command, die. He hears the pack exchanging specific orders like kill them.
He thinks he hears that.
Most importantly, look at the exact moment of the retreat. The humans didn't break the wolf line. Auric hears a single command, drive them out, followed by the word withdraw passing through the pack in short, synchronized bursts.
Which could just be a series of localized barks indicating submission or retreat, animal communication.
It wasn't an instinctual scatter. When an animal is overwhelmed, it panics and runs. These wolves disengaged cleanly, executing a synchronized, covering military retreat back into the tree line.
Right, but
Instinct, no matter how highly evolved or pressured by starvation, does not orchestrate a tactical withdrawal. That requires abstract thought, language, and conscious organization. It represents a fundamental shift in the consciousness of the predators.
Okay, we need to stop right here. Because you are building this entire theory of synchronized military sapience on the auditory experience of one single man, Eric.
He's the only one close enough to hear it.
If we are going to interrogate this scientifically, we have to interrogate his reliability as a witness. Is it intellectually rigorous to build a theory of conscious animal evolution on the testimony of a man who is actively experiencing a profound psychological breakdown?
I absolutely reject the premise that Auric is having a psychological breakdown. Traumatized? Yes. But broken? No.
have you looked at his daily routine?
He's grieving.
He is isolated in a damp, decaying stone tower, paralyzed by the grief of losing his wife Amara and his daughter Mira, and he self-medicates constantly with his own poorly mixed root-heavy beer.
Hey, don't knock the coping mechanism.
Anyone who has ever tried a disastrous quarantine homebrew knows exactly how desperate Auric must be to drink the stuff, to the point where he literally sways walking to his horse.
The beer is a coping mechanism, yes. It doesn't invalidate his eyes and ears.
He openly admits to auditory and visual hallucinations long before the wolves attack. He tells us he hears whispers in the weather. He explicitly describes seeing a pair of rats arguing in the street like drunks at a bar.
It's metaphor.
When he runs to Elara to warn her that the wolves are speaking, what does she do? She immediately, and quite rationally I might add, asks him how much he's had to drink. And crucially, Eric agrees with her internally.
Well, he doubts himself. That's natural.
He tells himself it's the drink, the exhaustion, the grief. We have a heavily intoxicated, grieving narrator mapping his own native language onto the snarls and barks of a coordinated pack hunt. He is projecting human malice onto animal instinct because he needs an enemy to blame for his own internal pain.
I completely disagree with that framing. Yes, I concede Eric's fragility. He is traumatized and his coping mechanisms are destructive, but I argue that his trauma is precisely the mechanism that makes him uniquely attuned to a reality that everyone else in Skyreach is actively, arrogantly ignoring.
English.
Because trauma shatters your existing worldview. Look at Skyreach. They are blinded by the ideology of progress. They believe they control the world because they have ledgers, masonry, and water rights.
They do control the water rights. They built the dam.
But Alara looks at the forest and just sees raw materials to be categorized and exploited. She filters the entire world through human hubris. Eric's trauma has stripped him of that hubris. He is no longer filtering the valley through the lens of human superiority.
So his hallucinations are just him tuning into a higher frequency? Come on.
They aren't hallucinations. The text explicitly backs him up. Notice that the physical actions of the wolves perfectly match the auditory commands Eric heard.
Pure coincidence.
It's not like he heard dance and they attacked. When he hears drive them out, the pack shifts dynamically as one unit to push the guards back. When he hears withdraw, they execute the flawless tactical retreat we just discussed. It wasn't just noise, it was conscious intent pressed into sound.
Okay, but what about the phantom cat Savannah? He spends 6 months believing he is hallucinating a feral cat in his tower.
Exactly. And what happens at the end of chapter 1? Eric returns to his tower, confronts Savannah, and says out loud, "You're real."
Yeah, because he's losing his grip.
No, that isn't the climax of a psychological break. That is the moment of clarity. If you look at the author's notes regarding the themes of the book, he explicitly states he wants to explore how animals perceive the world. Eric realizing Savannah is real is the author signaling to the reader that Eric is finally perceiving the valley's true hidden nature.
I think treating Savannah as a supernatural confirmation rather than a symptom of his isolation is a massive stretch. I mean, when he says you're real to that cat, is drenched in blood, smelling of wet stone and fear, he is desperate for a connection, even if he has to fabricate the reality of it.
We're just going to have to disagree on his mental state.
Clearly. But let's step away from Eric for a moment. Because if you're arguing that Eric is the only human seeing the truth, we need to cross-reference that with the one perspective in the book that is entirely unfiltered by human hubris.
Ember. Gladly. Ember's storyline in the valley is the key to this whole debate.
It is, but I think it proves my point. Ember is a Coy-wolf, a hybrid, right? And her primary conflict in the early chapters isn't with humanity. It's with Nicodemus, the elderly coyote alpha.
Right. The traditionalist.
She faces intense prejudice from the traditionalist coyotes. The author's appendices give us the historical context for this. Generations ago, human agriculture artificially inflated the deer population, which drew the great gray wolves down from the mountains. Now that the dam has destroyed the food supply, you have wolves, coyotes, and Coy-wolves trapped in a shrinking territory.
And the purists are turning on the hybrids.
Exactly. It mirrors human societal struggles under resource scarcity. The central themes here are adaptation versus tradition. The great grays and the coyotes are fighting a brutal biological turf war because the ecosystem has been artificially compressed by the dam.
So you're saying it's all just math?
I'm saying the wolves attacking Skyreach aren't agents of some supernatural awakening. They are simply another biological faction competing for suddenly limited resources. The dam caused the scarcity, and the scarcity caused the war.
That ignores the explicit lore the author built into the animal society, though. Yes, resource scarcity is the spark, but if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, so it's just a turf war over deer, you are entirely missing the metaphysical layer of the text, the spirit mother.
Oh, you're relying on a myth the animals tell each other?
For those who might not have dug into the author's extensive appendices, let's clarify what the spirit mother actually is in this universe. It isn't just a folktale. The author describes the spirit mother as an active, emergent property of the valley's biosphere.
An emergent property doesn't mean a magical deity.
It represents forces older than any individual species. We aren't just talking about caloric deficits here. The unprecedented intelligence of the wolves, their sudden use of language and military tactics, alongside Ember's unique existence as an adaptable hybrid, suggest that the valley itself is actively elevating animal consciousness. to combat the existential threat of human dominance.
See, that fundamentally changes the genre of the book from a grounded ecological thriller to a monolithic fantasy war.
No, it elevates it to an ideological war. It is an ideological clash between human technological dominance, represented by the dam, the uniform planks, the hubris of Alara's ledgers, and an awakened natural world.
But
Let me just say, the wolves are just hungry. They are pushing back against the very concept of human dominion. That is why they used language. They wanted the humans to know that nature is no longer passive. It is mounting a conscious, organized defense.
But look at the author's stated writing philosophy. He emphasizes that the most compelling conflicts emerge from unintended consequences. To frame this as an awakened biosphere, executing a conscious ideological war against humanity completely undercuts the deep tragedy of the ecological collapse.
How does it undercut the tragedy?
Because if the wolves are a sapient military, guided by a spirit mother, they become a standard fantasy army. The true tragedy of Ember is that Skyreach wasn't evil. They were just trying to survive the long sickness. They built a dam so their children wouldn't starve.
At the expense of everything else.
Trying to secure their own survival, they inadvertently starved the koi wolves and triggered a brutal natural correction. It is the tragedy of human foresight being too narrow.
I argue it drastically enhances the tragedy. Skyreach thinks they are just manipulating water and dirt. They don't realize they are dealing with a living, thinking ecosystem until it is far too late.
They still don't realize it.
Exactly. When Eric tells Alara, they spoke, and she dismisses him by saying, we survived, that's what matters, she encapsulates the exact human arrogance that the Valley is punishing. They think survival is just an engineering problem. They think it's just about having enough grain and lamp oil in the storehouse.
Because historically for them, it has been.
But they completely fail to realize that by pushing the ecosystem to the brink, they force the animals to cross a cognitive threshold. The rules of engagement have fundamentally changed, and the humans are still playing by the old rules.
Well, if the animals have crossed a cognitive threshold, where does that leave Ember? Is she just a casualty of this ideological war?
Far from it. Ember is the focal point. I mean, she is rejected by purists like Nicodemus because she represents change, hybridization, a break from the old ways.
Right.
But in a world where the great gray wolves are speaking and organizing and the humans are hoarding the rivers, strict tradition is a death sentence. The author notes that cooperation versus domination is a central theme. Skyreach chose domination over nature. The great grays seem to be choosing military domination over the humans.
So Ember is the middle ground.
Yeah. Ember, who relies on stealth, observation, and bridging different worlds, represents the only viable path forward.
That is a really fascinating way to frame her character. She is the biological reality of adaptation caught between two factions obsessed with domination. And, as we look at both of these perspectives, the view of the conflict as a tragic, systemic, ecological consequence of human engineering versus your view of a conscious, organized animal uprising, it seems we do arrive at a stark common ground.
We do. Regardless of whether the wolves are acting on biological desperation or sapient military strategy, we both agree that the Valley is undergoing a massive, irreversible transformation. The old rules of survival simply no longer apply.
And we agree that the catalyst for all of this was the hubris of Skyreach's unchecked expansion. Their belief that permanent stone and controlled water isolate them from the consequences of the natural world is exactly what ignited this powder keg.
Oh, 100%.
The dam was the match, whether it sparked a mechanical trophic cascade or an evolutionary awakening.
Exactly. It is the profound arrogance of thinking you can build a wall against the wild, only to realize the wild has learned how to breach the gates. Alara traded the health of the entire valley for a ledger full of grain surpluses, and now the bill has come due.
There is clearly an incredible amount of depth left to explore in Embers. The Coy-wolf Chronicles, the text gives us a rich, uncompromising world where the lines between human and animal, madness and insight, tradition and adaptation are constantly blurring.
It really does.
Ember herself, standing at the intersection of these colliding ecosystems, has a tremendous burden to carry as the narrative unfolds.
She absolutely does. And Eric, sitting in his damp tower with a cat that may or may not be real, has to decide his next move. Does he continue to warn a town that refuses to listen, or does he step aside and let Skyreach face the consequences of their own supposed progress?
It leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we step away from the text today. When we build our dams and measure our trenches, we call it salvation. But we have to wonder if humanity can ever truly control nature without eventually forcing nature to outsmart us. Thank you for joining us on the debate. Keep questioning and keep exploring.